Hey, how you doing? It's Clayton from howtodrawcomics.net, and in this video, you're going to see step by step how to construct a female bust, the head, the torso, the hairstyle, from start to finish. All right, let's just jump straight into it. Let's start out with a head. We're laying down a cranium, which at this stage is nothing more than a lightly drawn, roughly drawn circle. And then the next step is to determine, well, what direction is the head going to be looking in? Will she be looking straight at us? Will it be a direct profile shot? Will she be facing away from us? Will we be looking at the back of her head? These are the micro decisions I make as I'm constructing a drawing. So let's say that she's looking in this direction. Now, I don't want to think about it too much, which is difficult to do when I'm breaking down the process to this degree, but you'll see that I've drawn a vertical line straight down the middle of the face and another one intersecting it around the equator, the belly of the sphere. This describes the form of the sphere itself. It takes it from being a circle to a three-dimensional object. From there, what I'm going to do is sketch out the front of the face by extending the center line down to the chin. Because she's looking up here, it's not going to drop down as far as it would if she was looking straight at us at an eye-level view. I'm going to chop off the sides of this sphere to create the temporal area of the skull. And then I'm going to drop the sides of the jaw down and then link them up. You'll see what we end up with is somewhat of a rounded shape for the jawline. And that makes sense in this particular circumstance because she is looking up at us, or looking up and away from us, so we're looking at an upward shot of her head, which means the shape of the jaw is going to foreshorten and morph in perspective. The bottom of the chin, most notably, is going to move upward, taking the line that joins the corner of the jaw to the sides of the chin, upward with it, and somewhat straightening it out, so the angle just isn't as steep anymore. Meanwhile, the corners of the jaw will actually drop. Just some of the technical stuff behind what is actually happening when it comes to drawing the jawline at this angle and why it's presented in the way that it's presented. Okay, wonderful. Next, we'll plot out where the facial features are going to be. Now, remember, this is all customizational. So this is all customizable. All right, got to use my English here. All right, so we've got the facial features plotted out. Next up, I'm actually going to go ahead and draw out some head planes. That'll describe where the front of the face is, cheekbones are, and where the front of the face is separated from the sides of the head. I'll draw in an ear. I'm still trying to keep everything as loose as I can, because if I get too tight at this point, there's a good chance that I'm just going to end up with a head that lacks character. You know, I want to be somewhat focused on every part of the head, the entire thing as a whole, all at once, rather than any one area, any one facial feature. I want to keep in mind how it is all coming together. Now, she is looking up here, which means the nose is going to be raised. Okay, we're going to see the bottom plane of the nose. It'll be more visible than it usually would be, simply because the camera is placed below it. I'm defining its shape. And in fact, the eyes here might even drop down further. And already, because I've been really stepping through this process with you and thinking about it, not on an unconscious level, but on a fairly conscious level of thinking, it's probably not coming out as well as it usually would for me. And so less thinking is usually the way to go when it comes to the initial sketch of a drawing. At least that's what I've found. It's so easy to overthink a drawing, to overanalyze it. But remember to separate yourself from it a little bit. Look at the broader overall scope of what it is you're drawing, and then try to bring it together from that vantage point. Going to do some erasing here. Just defining the separation from the top portion of the nose to the bottom. Now, the head here that we're drawing is starting to look a little bit more masculine, actually, but we'll start to add in characteristics soon that makes it look more feminine. I try not to be too rigid in the way in which I depict the facial features, at least these days. I try to keep it a little bit more sketchy, try to introduce that additional level of realism to what it is I'm drawing, to produce a less stylized aesthetic. And I find that just adds a little bit more life to the heads that I draw. We'll place in some lips here. And when it comes to drawing the ladies, of course, you usually want to go for a tone on their lip which is a little darker than that of a male's, just to really introduce that additional level of contrast. And what that's going to do is increase the feminine appeal within the head itself. That contrast is heavily associated with women typically. So usually you'll find that they have those key areas of attention placed around their eyes and their lips precisely because of the level of contrast in those areas. And that is completely intentional, of course. The eyes and the mouth are key areas of expression on any head, but especially that of a woman. That's why the attention is drawn to them most prominently. Probably where your eyes go first when taking in the head as a whole. And you can see here that the jawline that I'm placing in, I'm giving it some shape. I'm not making it completely 100% straight. It's not completely triangular. Lay in some rendering onto the eyebrows, just to get a fur-like texture happening for them. We're going to show visually that they are made of hair, of course. Now the nose may appear too wide at this point, and is it too wide, technically? Who knows? I don't know, but to my eye, it looks a bit too wide. So I'm taking it in a bit, and it could just be that character. It could be just this particular character that I'm drawing where the nose looks too wide on her. Okay, let's lay in some more eyelashes. We'll thicken them up. And now I'm going to describe the shape of the far side of her head. Sculpting that out a bit. Making it nice and defined, incorporating some attributes of anatomy in there just to get that realism and accuracy happening. You can see that I've tried to incorporate as much expression into her face as possible. Now, is the line work refined? Yes. Is it completely polished and clean? No, it is not. It's still quite loose at this point. I'm attending to the ear now, and I'm thinking about, okay, based on the perspective that the head is being drawn in, how does the shape of the ear morph? How does it distort? What happens when we start to foreshorten it? Now, if I think of it, the ear as being a simple shape, a simple form, then it becomes a lot easier to describe how it should look in this particular perspective. And it makes it much easier to draw in the interior anatomy of the ear after the fact, after I've figured that out, after I've got that basic shape down. Okay, so for the most part, we've got a beautiful lady head drawn in there. We'll lay in a little dark patch of rendering just underneath her lips because there is a significant indentation right underneath that bottom lip that you'll often notice. We could add in some cheekbones or at least hint toward them, but you really don't want to do that a whole lot on a female character. Typically, it will either make them look more masculine or older or just in general blemished in some way. Okay, so now let's draw out the rest of her body here. We'll worry about laying in some hair later on and describing an interesting hairstyle for her, but for now, I think we want to get the entire bust down just to figure out how we're actually going to fashion that hairstyle in order to suit the overall composition of her pose, because the hair is somewhat of an extension of a character's gesture. Okay, I'm laying in an iris and a pupil just before we move on to the body. And also, I'm just going to darken up the middle of the mouth opening and bring down the corner on the far side of the mouth so that it matches the perspective and the positioning of the corner of the opposite side of the mouth according to that perspective. Okay, so next, I really do want to try to keep this loose, and one of the reasons I'm going to be doing that is to vaguely try to get a understanding of what the proportions of the figure need to be. And I say vague because I really do almost need to squint my eyes here. I need to keep the artwork blurry in a sense through its roughness so that I can focus just primarily on the main masses that I'm dealing with, where they're positioned, how large they are, what scale they are, and also what pose they're going to be in. So I'm going to draw this out very lightly to begin with. I'm thinking about, okay, what's the general thickness of her neck going to be? And what way, just based on what I place down here, do I want her body to be facing? Well, her head is facing in one direction, so maybe it would be more dynamic to have the body face in the opposite direction. So if I draw the bottom of her neck here with this little circle that I'm placing down, just as an indication as to where the front base of the neck is going to be positioned, then I can start to draw the rest of the body out from that point. And what I could do is angle the shoulders in the opposite direction to the angle that the head is positioned on. Now, what I want to figure out here also is, okay, where do I want the shoulders to be? Okay, well, I think if I place the shoulders here, and I'm looking at their positioning in relation to where the bottom of the chin is in order to determine whether or not the neck is going to be too long if I place them down here, or too short if I place them all the way up here. I want a midway, nice sweet spot point where it's going to look correct. So I'll draw in the shoulders, and now I want to get a general idea for roughly how big the shoulders are going to be in comparison to the head. And because I position the shoulders, I now know that a certain amount of foreshortening is going to occur between the center of the collarbone and the shoulder. Okay. So I'm getting a little bit caught up in the structure right now, so I'm just going to go ahead and really roughly just sketch something out here. Going to get rid of this. And sometimes I just need to work quickly because that way my artistic intuition can kick in. You know, again, overthinking it, I can't work when I'm overthinking. I can't think about it. I've got to feel it out. I've got to lay something down onto the page, and then from there, determine whether or not it's working. And you can see the first line that I lay down is not the line most likely that I'm going to stick with. More often than not, that's not the case at all. Usually I'm going to place down a more accurate line based upon a less accurate line. I'm outlining the breast here. And I'm also drawing in a center line that's going to run down the front of the torso. The reason that I'm drawing that in right now is to figure out, okay, where is the breast that is closest to us going to be positioned? And you can see I don't have the full structure down yet, and I am already starting to add in the anatomy, such as, for example, the breasts here. But, even though there is an order to how things can be done, you don't always need to stick to it. I'm trying to figure out exactly, all right, how do I approach this portion now? All right, how am I going to bring in the shoulders enough according to where I position the breasts so that it all makes sense? And what way is the arm supposed to be facing? Are we looking at the side of it here? Are we looking at the front of the arm? Okay, exactly what angle is the arm being presented on? I think it's going to be rotated more toward the side. I think that's what's going to work best. And maybe I want to bring it all the way in. Okay, maybe it's going to be the outside shape of the far side of her body here. You can see that I've just repositioned that arm completely. Now, did I know that I was going to do that right off the bat? No, I did not. I improvised. And I find that a lot of the time, that's exactly what I'm doing with my art, is I'm improvising. Something works, something doesn't work, I change it. Even if it works sometimes, I'll change it. I'll shift it towards something that's better. Or maybe I'll just see if it might look better. It might not, but at least I know once I've experimented. So always be willing to do that. Always be willing to experiment a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to cheat a little bit here. Take her entire body and just shift it over a tiny bit. There we go. Do some erasing. Again, I'm still trying to pull the anatomy together. Still trying to figure out, what needs to happen to it especially on the far side, in order for it to work. Beyond that collarbone, which is furthest away from us, what do I place in? Are we going to be seeing the shoulder here? Possibly. I mean, I've laid it in, and it seems to be working well, better than what I had there before. Now these breasts, because the shoulder is now being pushed forward a little bit more, what we want to describe is a certain amount of pressure being applied to the breasts as they are pushed inward toward the center of the torso. You'll notice that they're not just completely circular. There's actually a particular shape to them. I think of breasts as almost sort of like a water balloon. There's a certain amount of buoyancy to them. They almost look like a teardrop. Bigger at the bottom, smaller at the top. And then what we're going to do is think about, okay, well, are we going to be able to see the far arm? And I'm just going to place it in there to see how that would look. Does it look right? Yeah, it does. I think that can work. So I'm never sure exactly what the heck I'm doing. If you haven't quite guessed yet, I'm constantly trying to figure out the best approach to a drawing. Every single drawing I create brings to the table its own challenges, its own little set of lessons that I know I'm going to learn from and gain experience from. And I guess that's what life is like in general, really. There's no guide to life. Yeah, there's general rules that you can follow, but it's always going to offer new lessons And you're going to grow from those lessons. Sometimes the hardest lessons you will grow the most from. It's the same with art. It truly is. And that's what I find so addictive about it. Why I'm so obsessed with it. Because it's not like I'm ever really going to get to a point where I know everything there possibly is to know about drawing. There's always going to be something new to learn. Now that I've got this structure down for the rest of her body, and I do think what I'm going to do is just bring her neck in a little bit here too. I felt like that was looking just a little too thick. Didn't quite match up with the rest of her body. Okay, there was some proportional issues there. And now at the base of the neck, I need to determine, okay, well, what does that do to these long band-like muscles that run from the side of the ears down to the base of the neck? What is that doing on that far side that I just erased? And so I'm trying not to define every single line here. That would just be somewhat unrealistic. And also, if you add too much details and definition to the anatomy of the neck, it can start to cause the character to look somewhat haggard, gaunt. Okay, not every muscle and sinew in the entire body should be defined, should be visible. Especially on a female character, since they generally have more fat around their anatomy than men do, and not in an over-exaggerated way, but just in general, they tend to have softer skin for that reason too, less wrinkles, etc. That's why women tend to have that nice, smooth, clean look associated with them, especially when it comes to stylized comic book characters. Us guys, however, when it comes to male characters, I mean, you can draw them as ugly and messed up as you like, and they're still going to look fine. You could draw a feminine-looking male character, or whatever. But there's really one of the things that makes it difficult to draw a female character is that there's really only there's a smaller scope of things that you can do with them before the aesthetic appeal starts to wane a little bit. Okay, so we have a nice bust shot of a female character laid down here, just the basic foundation for now. Let's start adding in somewhat of a design for her. I'll shrink her down to make room for her hairdo. And for her hair, I'm going to sketch in something just very light to begin with, just to get the overall gesture down. And especially when it comes to hair, I want to be extremely loose, nice and gestural with my lines. And I don't know what hairstyle exactly I'm going to go with or what's going to work best here. I'm laying something down. Just get something down onto the page. There should be never the excuse of, oh, I can't think of anything to draw right now. Just start drawing something. Just start laying down lines and see what happens. See what it leads to. I like the direction that this is going in. maybe I had somewhat of a really vague idea of what would work right before the moment I start drawing out these lines, but I'm wondering right now, just out of curiosity, if I give this lady a mullet, would it look good? I don't know, maybe. Let's lay it in there and see what happens. It kind of looks cool, actually. I dig that. Let's take that same idea now and see whether or not we can enhance it to make it even more appealing. Okay, so even though the idea of a mullet worked, we erased it still just to see if we could come up with a better variation of it. So just because the idea didn't work doesn't mean that it can't be presented in a different way that will be more desirable. Just tweaking her nostril here. Again, I noticed random things about a drawing oftentimes that I got to tweak while I think of it, otherwise I forget about it. Okay, so now that I've got that down, I'm going to go ahead here and start to refine the hairstyle that I've started developing. It's not fully formed yet. But that's what this process is all about. That's what this phase of the refinement is intended to do, is to take that very basic idea, that loosely laid down sketch, and build upon it. Turn up the resolution. And what if we then went and we decided, oh, hey, let's bring some hair down the sides of her face? Maybe that would look cool too. Sure, let's give it a crack. Maybe it will look cool. Then again, maybe not. Actually, see, I haven't made up my mind yet. And the reason that I'm bringing your attention to the fact that I'm humming and hawing about the direction I want to take with this drawing is because it's not a straightforward process. And so you can take the pressure off of yourself right now. You don't have to feel as though when you're going into a drawing, everything's got to be sorted and planned out perfectly. You can make it up as you go, just like what I'm doing here. Am I entirely happy with what I've got there? No. So I'm going to undo that. And I'll just have the hair going back behind her ears like so. And that'll work just as well. See, and it doesn't take long to just see whether or not something will work. That's the fun part. You're in that creative mindset. It's going to be inevitable that you come up with new ideas along the way. Lean into them. Don't ignore them. Give them some value. That's a really cool ability to have. Ideas popping up on the fly. Never take that for granted. Most people have an empty box. There's no creativity whatsoever. So if you're somebody like me who is constantly filled with ideas and different directions that they could take with their drawing, then man, you may as well explore them. You never know what they could come to be if you take that thread and see where it leads. You'll notice hair takes a decent amount of time, possibly more time spent than any one other area of the drawing. And that's just because of its intricate nature. You also notice that there's very few straight lines when it comes to hair that are being laid in. They're all very streamlined and elegant. There's a wave to almost all of them, giving the hair this beautiful sense of movement and gesture throughout the entire style. You'll notice that I'm adding in new clumps of hair here and there, breaking it up, trying to give it a decent amount of texture. We don't want the hair to just look plastic. We want it to make it look as though it's actually made of hair. So I'm giving her more of a fringe now. Again, this is just something I added in on the fly. Thought it looked good, so hey, why not go with it? I'm doubling up on some of these lines as well, again, to really push that hair texture that we've got going on here. And every clump of hair, every large area of hair that I see throughout this style, the way in which I'm adding more detail and complexity to it is I'm just creating these divisions within, splitting it up. Some lines are set close together, others far apart. We want to create some randomness to the hair because randomness results in something more organic, whereas something that is uniform tends to have more of a synthetic feel to it. It doesn't feel like it feels like it's man-made. So with something like hair, we want to get as far away from that as possible. Keep in mind that hair and the style that you choose to put it in will be affected by other outside elements that cause it to shift, to move in different ways. In this case, you'll notice that the hair seems to be somewhat blowing in the wind, at least around the fringe area. Maybe it's also being pulled and pushed in various directions due to the movement of the character's body and the pose that she's been placed in. So the way in which hair is presented is at the whim of many other variables. All right. Just wrapping up the top of it here. Pulling off more clumps of hair. I'm going to tweak this one because I think that it doesn't quite look right. I feel like just the thickness and the amount of hair that I've shot off from that larger piece is not quite working. And again, I'm just using my eye there to figure that out, to determine that. There's no right or wrong. There's just your own eye, your own artistic taste. A lot of the time, that's what this can come down to. Now, yes, there are things that will determine objectively whether or not you've got a decent looking piece of artwork. If you're laying down inaccurate anatomy, or figures that are completely out of proportion in an obvious way, that's when you'll find that you run into problems. Okay, that's when you've got an issue with your art. And that's when people are going to start noticing that, hey, maybe this person still has a little bit of learning to do in order to get to the level of ability that they're striving to be at. And that's what's great about learning the fundamentals, is that once you learn them, you can take those few fundamentals and use them to draw anything you like. Men, women, cats, dogs, whatever. Buildings, trees. Whatever it is. And that's, just really incredible, I think. Really incredible. So now that we've got the style of the hair pretty much defined, I guess we could attend to this side of the hair now, which I had forgotten up until this point. I was so focused in around the top, and you know why that was? It was because there was just a lot going on up there, and I didn't feel as confident. I wasn't sure exactly where it was going to go. Whereas, down here is pretty straightforward. I had a good idea of how I was going to break it up, the kind of direction that the hair would flow in. And so usually I'm not as concerned. Usually my attention is placed in the portions of the drawing that I'm stressing about the most. So I'm spending an exorbitant amount of time on the hair. This always happens, by the way, no matter what character it is I'm drawing. It's just part of the process. Always look forward to drawing that hair. And the great thing about it is hair doesn't need to look like anything in particular. And so it's just a very organic process. You're able to relax a little bit. An organic process for an organic element that you're drawing. Now, of course, the things that you do want to focus on with hair is capturing the correct shape that you want to go for with the style. You also try to create a certain amount of texture and volume within the hair. Liveliness. Capture that nice gesture happening within it. So you got that offshoot of hair that I've just placed in there. And I might even do that up here some more too. There we go. And now I'm going to go ahead and just mess around with the anatomy on her neck some more. I feel like that's not quite looking right to me. Again, I'm making these judgment calls as I go. I feel like, this is probably going to be the front of her neck here. And given that, maybe this side neck muscle is going to be moved over closer to the center a bit. So now we do have quite a square, sharp-looking jaw going on for this female character, to the point where it is starting to look a lot more masculine. So in order to fix that, I'm just going to make the neck not as thick. Because a thick neck is also going to add to that masculine appearance of a female character. And I'm going to round out the sides of the jaw, or the corners of the jaw, some more. Just to soften it up a bit. Now, I still want some decent shape going on there. But I don't want it to look too manly. That's often at times a problem that people will run into when it comes to drawing women, is just that their ladies turn out way more masculine than they would like. There's no problem having a masculine-looking female character. That's totally fine. But if that's not the intended look that you want to go for with your character, then this is when you run into problems. This is when you're trying to depict something, you're trying to draw something, but it's not coming out the way that you want it to look. And that's when there's a problem. I'm just going to completely get rid of her nostril here for a second and redraw it in there. There we go. That's a bit better. And now, as for the rest of her body, let's actually draw some clothes onto her. I think something simple, like, for example, maybe a nice singlet or top. I think that'll work quite well. My main focus here is just getting that opening where the head pops through to be drawn in such a way that it's going to work with the perspective of the body. I want the shirt to, of course, follow the form of the torso. And as for the armholes of this top, I think they're probably going to come in up there. Maybe not. Let's have another go at that. It's crazy to think that a drawing that I create only looks good because I messed it up so many times along the way. I made so many wrong calls throughout. But that really is the way that artwork seems to develop for me. And now we'll draw in the base of the top. Again, we've gone for something really, really simple here. Nothing too fancy. And I think sometimes that's all you need. Simple is sometimes very elegant. And all that's required. When it comes to female characters, you'll find less is oftentimes more. So now there's, of course, going to be some folds and wrinkles within this top that I want to lay in. So I'll get those drawn out. And the question is, what thickness are those folds going to be? How long will they be? And where will they reside? This is obviously going to be a top that's made of stretchy, thin material. And so I'm thinking we'll keep those folds and creases minimal and quite sharp, quite thin. Maybe something like that. At least for now. We're going to get some stretching of the material between the breasts, so we'll describe that with some folds and wrinkles that are placed in between them. Then I'm going to define the outline of this character, because I think she's pretty much good to go. And you'll see that the line work, of course, still isn't as polished as it could be, or as clean. I haven't really gone on to create another layer, then place down some super slick line art over the top. This is just a sketch, so I don't think it really calls for that. But as far as a drawing is concerned, and what it needs to be really for an inker to go in over the top, this is plenty refined enough. An inker could easily take this and work some magic with it, I have no doubt. Sometimes a looser drawing is even better for inkers because it gives them the freedom to add their own touch to the drawing, add their own flavor to it. Now you can see me here erasing parts of the shoulder in order to adjust its shape. So I'm still tinkering. I'm still fiddling around with this artwork. Trying to find new ways that I can improve the shape of the different areas that I'm dealing with. Sometimes I'm not happy with the adjustments I make. Sometimes they don't quite work. And sometimes they do. I like that drawing isn't as straightforward as maybe you think it should be. Yes, it makes it harder, but it also gives you room to be so much more creative. And the question is, for example, like a shoulder, such as the one I'm drawing here, how far does it need to come out? What is the real thing that I'm trying to fix at this point? Do I even know what it is? My eyes know, but my brain doesn't necessarily. It's all in the shape. And I'm sure that once I've adjusted this shape and you cross-check the anatomy, that it'll look more correct than it did, even though I had no idea why or what I was doing in order to fix it. It really comes down to the outline. Female characters, shape is everything. We'll lay in a darker outline underneath her breasts here. Get some line weight action happening. And then draw in the opening of her top. And now I think I'll jump back up to her jawline here and tinker around with it some more. Yes, this woman does look masculine, and I like that about her, in a sense. I think that's a good characteristic that we're seeing here within her. But it's masculine in an attractive way, I feel. No matter what it is you're trying to convey, it should be aesthetically pleasing to the eye. It should look good to the eye. Yes, we want our female characters and our male characters alike to look attractive. We don't want them to be an eyesore. We don't want them to look ugly and give our audience a less than satisfactory experience. Beautiful people are attractive, and we want to attract people to our art. We also want to view ourselves as attractive. That's why we become fans of characters that are indeed attractive. That's why we connect with them, even if in reality we're anything but. In that story, whatever story it is we're reading, where we get to be Superman as handsome and muscular and as strong as he is, I mean, that's why we're reading it, for that experience, to escape reality and to be something larger than life. Now, this lady also has some pretty fierce eyebrows that I'm going to redraw in here maybe. Again, just tweaking the final aspects of the drawing that I really want to perfect. I think that the eyebrows were drawn in just a little bit too roughly before, so now I'm cleaning them up. I'll do the same with the eyebrow on the opposite side of her face too. Getting my eraser in there, adjusting the shape before placing in the rendering. And I also might want to bring in that far side of her head just a little bit too. So we've got her brow. Then we've got her cheekbone there. I really like the appearance that we've got going on for her face. She looks quite unique. Okay, cool. Well, that's all working very well. The last thing that I'll do here is just go over the main portions of her hair one more time, darken them up to give them the line weights they need in order to fit in with the rest of the artwork. You can see that I've line weighted her body and her face to a certain extent. I want to do the same with her hair, just to make sure everything looks as finished as everything else. We want to at least bring all the elements of the drawing to the same level of completion, even if there's not really any one area that's completely and 100% done. Once more, this is just a pencil sketch. Not finished inks. I'm going to draw in another offshoot of hair, coming off this larger clump, just to break it up a bit. And then add in some line weights around these sections of hair. And I think that'll just about do it. Hey, I hope that you enjoyed today's video tutorial and that you got a ton of value out of it. If you'd like more comic art tips, tricks, and tutorials, be sure to head on over to www.howtodrawcomics.net. Over on the site, you'll find a bunch of free content, tutorials, videos, heck, we've even got a podcast. And when you're ready to take your comic art skill set to the next level, then I highly suggest you take a browse through our premium library of comic art courses by instructors such as David Finch, myself, Trent Kanuga, Ed Foychuk, Robert Marzullo, and the list goes on. All right, until next time, stay creative and keep on drawing. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye for now.